Declan.
Hello, Renu.
Big day today.
It's very exciting. So we're dropping this podcast literally just a few moments after the oral prostate session at ESMO in Barcelona.
Yeah, absolutely. This is like the post-match interview.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, post-match interview. Yes, that's great.
Yeah, and it's a crowded studio today. We've got a couple of celebrities.
Yeah, so we're dedicating this one completely to the UpFront PSMA trial. It is the first, I think, randomised trial of lutetium PSMA in the metastatic hormone-sensitive setting to read out. And we're here with Professor Arun Azad from Peter Mac and Professor Michael Hofman from Peter Mac, who put this whole trial together up from PSMA. First of all, congratulations, Arun.
Congratulations.
You've just presented this at ESMO and the paper has just dropped in Lancet Oncology. Congratulations.
Yeah, thanks, Declan. Thanks, Renu. Very exciting. Very, very exciting.
Well, all good things happen in threes. Yeah. So amazing presentation at ESMO. Big deal. Big publication in Lancet Oncology, and now a podcast to boot.
the real highlight.
The crowning glory. Look, it's great. So that's what we're here. We're going to talk about that today. We want to also thank our silver partners on the podcast, Novartis, who joined us recently, Renu.
Absolutely. Great to have them on board.
Yeah, they've been great because, of course, PSMA imaging and theranostics have been a really big part of our interest for the past 4.5 years on GUcast and at work for 10 years. Michael will talk about that in a second. And as part of our partnership program, Novartis International joined us recently as silver partner. So this is a themed podcast. We're going to focus on radioligand therapy and prostate cancer. And thank you to everybody at Novartis in Switzerland. Special shout to Camellia, who's been a big fan of the podcast, for supporting us. And today, this is for you.
You give us a lot to talk about.
Exactly. So I suppose we wanted to go back a bit to the start of the journey, Michael, didn't we? We wanted to, this week or past week or so at Peter Mac, we were celebrating 10 years of PSMA imaging. So I thought we would kick off as we talk about UpFront PSMA to talk about the journey from the first PSMA scans at Peter Mac 10 years ago to the first theranostics to the grants that funded this. And then we're going to hear from Arun. He's going to tell us about the trial design, this randomized trial in the metastatic hormone sensitive setting and the data. And we can talk about where this leads us. But Michael Hofman, over to you first. Take us back to the PSMA journey we've been on, certainly at Peter Mac.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because people still call PSMA PET novel imaging, but it's been around for 10 years, a decade.
Like novel imaging.
Yeah, it's been around for a while. Last week we celebrated 10 years of PSMA PET at Peter Mac, and we made some cupcakes, themed cupcakes. And, some people commented it's the first time they'd eaten a prostate because we put some sort of PSMA PETs 3D printed on the cupcakes. So it was a little bit of fun, but we've achieved a lot in 10 years. But it's worth saying, we weren't first 10 years ago. This had already been done by our colleagues in Germany, both PSMA PET and lutetium PSMA therapy in Heidelberg, Bad Berka, and also Munich. But I think what we were first at is exactly what we have here, this kind of multidisciplinary collaboration, rather than just doing it in this dark nuclear medicine department, that we do it in collaboration with urology, medical oncology, and also our radiation oncology colleagues that aren't here. And I think that's where we hit a sweet spot. And that means we were able to design some prospective trials, some really high quality trials, both for imaging, like Pro-PSMA, our very first lutetium PSMA treatments that we did in 2015. We didn't do them as compassionate access treatments. We did them on a protocol. And then the therapy randomised study through the ANZUP Cancer Trials Group. So it's been a bit of a journey. We've done a lot in 10 years, Declan and Renu and Arun.
I think so. And Renu, taking us back, I think the imaging was already good, but when we started to see these very, end stage poor prostate cancer patients of ours who were getting lutetium PSMA, and it was really very exciting. These poor men had a lot of treatment already. And as ever in lots of different cancers, the more your cancer is progressing and you're into second line, third line, it's often getting more toxic. Yeah. But then lutetium PSMA came along and Michael and team presented the first prospective data of lutetium PSMA in this end-stage MCRPC population. I think it was 2018 that paper got published. And that suddenly got everybody's interest because, as with everything in oncology, people started thinking, what about if you did it a bit earlier and a bit earlier?
Exactly, Are we missing the boat? Can we bring it earlier, and does it have more effect earlier in the setting?
So that kind of, Michael, brings us up to where we are today. That was the initial study, but everyone started saying, well, let's do randomized trial, therapy trial, vision trial. But everyone then started saying, well, what about earlier? What about
even earlier?
We were always thinking, what next? So in I think this trial, UpFront PSMA, was conceived around 2018. Bear in mind, the therapy trial was still recruiting patients in the third line setting or even fourth line setting at that time. But we knew there were fantastic responses end of line, and we thought, let's do stuff earlier, and we may as well just jump several steps, be bold. Let's do it first line. And we had 2 trials in mind. One is lutectomy trial. Renu, you've already published that, first author, earlier this year in European Urology, a very small boutique trial of lutetium PSMA prior to prostatectomy. We were trying to put the urologists out of business with that trial. And a second trial in the same grant, which was in men with newly diagnosed prostate cancer. And I think this was conceived around November 2018. Arun had just migrated across the river in Melbourne. We have the Yarra River. It divides the city north and south, and Arun decided to move to Peter Mac, and we were talking, and this high volume, hormone sensitive, newly diagnosed group looks like a sweet spot. And every treatment, if we use it earlier in that group, seems to improve outcome. So even whilst we were generating the data for therapy, remember therapy hadn't been published for 3 years afterwards, nor the Vision trial. So we didn't have a lot of even high quality randomised data in the late stage, but we were like, let's do this really, really early.
But of course, you do need big grants to support that. So before we hand over to Arun to tell us about the trial and the data that he's presented today at ESMO, Michael, that was a big grant, I remember, that put together lutectomy and UpFront PSMA. We should acknowledge the people who...
Yeah, a very big grant from Movember Foundation, and Movember have been great at supporting PSMA PET cutting edge research in Australia from the early days. You know, I has to say in 2018, maybe most people hadn't heard of lutetium PSMA, so to use it early in a grant application is high risk. Many grant funders would turn away from that. It's maybe too high risk, but Movember lapped it up. And we had a number of other partners. It was also supported by a grant from the Australian government, Novartis, that supply us with PSMA 617 were critical. We also got some top-up funding from the US DOD.
Oh, that's right.
And we're all supported by the US-based Prostate Cancer Foundation, which we're our centre of excellence, which gives us time, or me time, to do research, and Renu as a young investigator
Supporter
time
of my PhD. Yeah, I mean, they're
to
amazing.
do research, and several other partners. We might put all the logos on the screen.
Yeah, I remember. And Peter Mac Foundation helped as well, the Victorian Cancer Agency, and of course, as you said, Novartis supplying some product. So we already presented the lutectomy data. Renu was first author, presented that last year, read out in European Urology. So that was in the neoadjuvant setting. That was like one step forward, but a much smaller phase 2 single-arm trial.
Really mainly looking at dosimetry and safety of the treatment.
And how's your PhD going?
It's almost there. It's almost there.
Yeah, very good. And she's published a very nice overview of theranostics, the whole immunology landscape of it in Nature Urology recently. But at the same time, UpFront PSMA was running a run. So it's time to get to the main course, I think, Arun, and
give us all the details.
Yeah. So what did you tell us a bit about the trial design, I suppose, and what you presented at ESMO and what you've published in Lancet Oncology today?
Yeah, thanks, Declan. I mean, Michael set the scene nicely, hasn't he? The background of it really was that we'd seen with other treatments in advanced prostate cancer, whether it's docetaxel, androgen receptor pathway inhibitors, that, there was more bang for your buck if you move those drugs earlier. Like similar hazard ratios in terms of overall survival for mCRPC versus mHSPC, but the absolute benefit was bigger, if you use and so now, of course, we had our Olympics, podcast not that long ago, the whole idea around, ADT plus an ARPI is a standard of care for mHSPC. And we obviously also, when the trial started, docetaxel was also a standard of care option. So that was the premise behind using lutetium PSMA earlier, bringing it forward, expecting that we were going to see good activity in the mCRPC setting from therapy, which, as Michael said, hadn't been published at that time. So we brought it forward, and the question was, well, how do we actually test that? And we decided to focus on the sort of patients who've got, with mHSPC, who've got the worst prognosis disease, the new, de novo or newly diagnosed high volume patients. And in those patients, based on the chartered trial, ADT, at that stage, ADT plus docetaxel was a standard of care, based on the chartered trial led by our friend, Professor Chris Sweeney. And so the design then really was, okay, well, the control arm is ADT plus docetaxel. We want a proper control arm. We don't want a dodgy control arm. We want a proper control arm. So let's do ADT plus docetaxel and compare it to ADT plus docetaxel and lutetium PSMA. Sort of simple design in the end. But then, of course, the question was, well, how do we design that? And Michael and I spent many, many phone calls during the grant, writing the grant in November, December 2018, trying to work that out. How many cycles of lutetium PSMA? Do we give it concurrently with docetaxel? Do we sandwich it between, docetaxel doses, etc.? So in the end, what we settled on was a design which was obviously all patients get ADT. Patients got the experimental arm, got 2 cycles of lutetium PSMA 617 at 7.5 gigabecquerels, and then got docetaxel 6 cycles, or if they were in the control arm, they just got ADT plus docetaxel. So simple design in the end. Probably in the end, Michael and I were reflecting on this not that long ago. In retrospect, maybe we were, perhaps we would look back on it now, so we undertreated those patients with lutetium PSMA. Only 2 cycles, obviously, is not a lot, but we didn't want to delay the commencement of the docetaxel in the experimental arm because that was the gold standard treatment. And we used, largely similar PET selection criteria to what we've used in our other studies. Obviously, there are some nuances, but high, tumour uptake on PSMA PET, minimal discordance. And then it was like, well, what do we do as a primary, how do we actually design this in terms of sample size and the primary endpoint? And being an mHSPC study, we chose a PSMA-based endpoint, which was undetectable PSA at 48 weeks on study, or 1 year, or 48 weeks to match up with the schedule of events. And we based, we benchmarked that off the Charter trial, and there was data showing what in the Charter trial, ADT plus docetaxel, what proportion of patients had an undetectable PSA at 12 months. And so we used that as our baseline as our control group. And then we essentially just decided that, I'd like to say it was more scientific than this, that, well, the lutetium PSMA should double the efficacy of this. So we basically set an undetectable PSA rate in the control arm of 25% at 48 weeks and 50% in the experimental arm. And, in reality, we actually, and it was I think an educated guess, it's fair to say, Michael, very educated, but still an educated guess. And we're very close. In the end, the data showed, and, we recruited 130 patients, and the data showed that the undetectable PSA rate in the experimental arm at week 48 was 41% versus 16% of the docetaxel arm. So we were a little bit under on both, but the actual delta, the difference of 25%, we were absolutely bang on. So I think we're both pretty chuffed about that. And, you saw in the presentation, highly significant, result, odds ratio of 3.88, p-value of 0.002. So clearly a significant, finding, and multiple other secondary endpoints also were, favoured the experimental arm. PSA progression-free survival, freedom from castration resistance, radiographic progression-free survival, and an objective response rate. We didn't show that in the presentation, but in patients with measurable disease. So there were lots of, across the board, this was a positive trial. The overall survival data is not mature. Only 21% of patients have had the event rate was only 21%. Even there, we're seeing maybe a slight signal there. It has a ratio of 0.83 favouring the experimental arm, but very early. But very much a positive study for a randomised phase 2 design. Very much a positive study and a consistent signal of benefit across all the endpoints. The other, I think, pleasing aspect of this is that we didn't see any excess toxicity from this, which is pleasing. I think we expected that with lutetium PSMA, but still, the grade 3/4 treatment-related adverse event rate was 29% in the experimental group and 27% in the control group. So no different. And the only adverse event that was really different between the treatment arms was dry mouth, which we'd expect with lutetium PSMA, but there were no grade 3/4 events. They were actually all nearly grade 1. So mild dry mouth, I think, for better survival. Most patients will accept that as a trade-off. Quality of life and pain, parameters also were similar between the treatment arms. If anything, maybe early on when you have docetaxel in that control group, maybe a little bit of difference, early on with better quality of life and particularly with the lutetium arm, but not significantly different as well. So across the board, the experimental treatment was efficacious. It was well tolerated. It didn't negatively impact quality of life. And it was up against, what was then a proper control arm. So I think we're all very proud of that. And the results are really, really encouraging and gratifying.
Wow.
Before we go to Michael, Renu, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it's pretty impressive, isn't it? It's, definitely indicates that there is some effect there's some activity here, some anti-tumour activity of lutetium PSMA.
Exactly. I think in the concluding slide you saw, I said that, these data indicate that that there's a potential role for lutetium PSMA in mHSPC, and we do want to see the results of the PSMA addition trial now, the phase 3 trial. That's obviously different because it's using an ARPI, which is obviously now the standard of care, rather than docetaxel. So that's going to be a really interesting study to see the results of. I mean, that will be the practice-changing study, but I think, the activity we're seeing here is really encouraging, and we certainly hope that will then translate into a positive trial with PSMA addition.
That's a really good comment, Arun, because, I think the standard of care for mHSPC is changing and has changed in the last couple of years, and that doublet therapy of ADT plus ARPI is now becoming the new standard. Triplet therapy is still indicated in some cases, but not in the vast majority of patients. So I think the addition of PSMA addition will be very important data to see how lutetium PSMA is kind of implicated in this setting.
Yeah, it's a great point, Renu. I mean, I think, the trial recruited May 2020 through to April 2023. And when the trial kicked off, we obviously had data showing that ARPI, doublet was a standard of care in mHSPC, but we didn't have access in Australia. Wasn't reimbursed. And so we really made almost somewhat a pragmatic decision to use docetaxel, which we could access, and was, of course, for de novo high volume disease, was really still a standard of care and a good option. And we were using it a lot then. The standard of care has changed since then. And that's what's going to be critical to see the results from PSMA addition, because that has got the more up-to-date control, standard of care as the control arm.
Yeah. And I suppose if you didn't have a positive readout from this addition of lutetium PSMA to a high standard of care in mHSPC, people would be getting maybe a little bit anxious about the big phase 3 PSMA addition coming, which will be, is that a year or two away? It's not soon, I think, is it?
I think it's still a way off. I mean, the event rate probably isn't as fast as everyone's anticipating. I think it's going to be a way off. So, I know this is sponsored by Novartis, but I think we're still pretty chuffed to say that we've published it first before the Novartis-sponsored trial, which is obviously the definitive trial. But we're really pleased to get this out first. And I think you're right, Declan. It would have been very not concerning, but I think for the whole field, not just Novartis, it would have been it would have been disconcerting if this study was negative, in terms of the future of lutetium PSMA in the mHSPC space.
I think it's really amazing. And, this is we talk about control arms a lot, but in this trial, I think this is a control arm that you can be really proud of.
Yeah, I mean, we wanted to do we didn't want to do a study with a control arm of ADT or something like that. I mean, that just wasn't something that we wanted to do. Because, you could have designed a study. We kicked around lots of different ideas. Do you do a study of ADT versus ADT plus lutetium? And I think there may actually be, for very high expressing patients, there may actually be a patient population who that would be suitable in, that sort of just ADT plus lutetium. But we really wanted to do a proper control arm. And this is an academic study. It's investigator, initiated, Peter Mac sponsored. We're taking it, we're leveraging the fantastic network that Michael and the ANZUP Cancer Trials Group helped establish, with across Australia with the therapy trial. So we ran it at many of the same centres. So we really want to do a study that we all believed in, not one where we're sort of holding our nose and doing it because, not believing in the control arm. We wanted to do it properly. Yeah. And if it goes down, it goes down, but at least we've done it properly. So, so we definitely, that was something that we wanted to do. And look, it wasn't always easy. We had some significant challenges, as you may all recall. There was, as I said, the recruitment dates, 2020 and 2021 in Australia were major write-offs because of the COVID-19 related lockdowns, and we were one of the reasons why it took 3 years to recruit and not shorter was because it wasn't even that the sites participating didn't recruit that quickly. It was just hard to get sites open and to get through all the startup processes because so many of the staff were furloughed or were doing other, jobs or hospital budgets and resources were being put towards obviously, other more pressing, matters related to COVID. So that was definitely a challenge. And then giving an, ADT plus, giving a chemotherapy study during COVID when everyone was trying to avoid infusion centers and things. Like we look back on it now and it's just like, how did we do this? We never would have anticipated. We literally put the first patient on. We opened April 2020 2020, put the first patient on at PSMA May 2020, and then I think I have to go back and look at the dates, but I think the first lockdown in Victoria started almost like May 2020. So we had the very quiet recruitment in that first winter because all the other sites couldn't recruit across Australia as well. So, but we have a great network. We have, of collaborators nationally. We have great local champions. The three of you can, and the departments that you lead and front, are a big factor in that. And so we pushed hard and we got there. But I think you had said before the study, commenced that there'd be this global pandemic and chemotherapy is going to be discouraged and dissuaded. And what would you do with this trial? I would have said, well, I think we probably just pack up and and put away. But we were determined and we got there in the end. And it took longer than we expected, of course, but it was still a success.
Okay, so Michael, then a bunch of questions that people will be asking after ESMO and Lancet Oncology, one of which will be around the imaging to select these patients, of course. And I have two questions about that. One is when we were selecting high volume patients, because it was kind of a stampede-ish population, but you were using PET imaging, both PSMA and FDG. So can you just first of all remind us a bit about the PET criteria for selecting patients for this study in a kind of high volume setting? And the second question will be about both PSMA and FDG, that kind of perennial question in PSMA theranostics, where here in Australia we favour doing both to try and optimally select patients. And tell us just about your impression of that in this setting. Yeah, so first of all, just about the entry criteria, I suppose.
Yeah, look, so we didn't have the therapy results, but we had some therapy data. So I think we chose an SUV max threshold. I don't have the protocol in front of me. I don't want to get the number wrong.
It's all very similar. It's very similar.
But it was similar to therapy. We needed a high uptake, higher than what we had, let's say, in the Vision trial, which was above liver. Therapy is above, SUV max above 20, and the liver's sort of 5 to 7. So that's 2 to 3 times the liver. Look, I think that was a wise choice. It's a small trial. It's only, 140, 130 patients. If it's a big industry-sponsored trial, we can go for a lower threshold, look for a smaller difference. But here, we want to select patients that are likely to benefit from the experimental arm. I think that was a wise choice. The results actually blow me away. They're far more positive than I expected. We chose a hard endpoint, undetectable PSA at 12 months. Whilst the trial was running, we started to see some readouts, let's say from PSMA4 or SPLASH using lutetium PSMA earlier. And the hazard ratios, they weren't as exciting as we thought they would be as we brought it earlier. So we were a little bit concerned, did we go too early? But no, we smashed the primary endpoint, and it's because we've selected patients well. So the experimental arm really benefited from the lutetium. It is worth noting we did modify our FDG criteria a lot because we were mindful that all patients were getting docetaxel eventually in both arms. So if you did have discordant disease, FDG positive, PSMA negative, that would eventually get treated by the docetaxel. So we actually said half your disease can be discordant, which was different to therapy. Up to half. But we also wanted to collect that data. So much like we've done with our therapy biomarkers analysis, we now have centrally collected PSMA and FDG PETs on everyone that we can go back and analyse. But here's an important factor. In therapy, we excluded around 30% of patients that were screened didn't make the PSMA FDG cutoff, either due to low PSMA expression at all sites or FDG discordance. When we did the power calculations for UpFront PSMA, we thought there isn't going to be much discordance or low PSMA expression because they're untreated. So we thought 10% failure rate, but it actually ended up being
22%.
22%,
yeah.
So
20%.
One, there were more patients with de novo discordance than we anticipated, and two, there were more patients with low PSMA expression.
And just on that point, Michael, because it's a one of the things with the design was that one of the things we kicked around a lot was like, how much prior ADT do we allow on this study, and if we don't allow any prior ADT, we just won't be able to recruit anyone because of course Renu and Declan, as you know, patients walk out with mHSPC, they walk out of the urologist office having had their Degaralex or their first ADT. High volume, you can't wait. So we allowed up to, at the time of signing consent and commencing screening, we allowed up to 4 weeks of ADT. Then of course patients had to go through their screening, etc. So sometimes by the time they had their PET scan, they'd had sort of 6-7 weeks sometimes of ADT. And so one of the reasons why we saw the 22% screen fail rate based on the PET criteria was because they'd had downregulation of their PSMA signal because ADT had killed off their tumor. It wasn't even, it was, some of it was downregulation, some of it was just, there was just no tumor left. So it's really interesting. We saw some patients who'd had their PSMA PET in the community, funded MBS funded scan, get a call from the nuclear med physician, really high PSMA, expression, high volume of disease, send them in, and then they're on ADT, and then we do the screening PET scan, and it's just like disease is melted away, and so they don't qualify. So that's going to be, we've got some plans to actually, with Michael leading, to actually go back and do some further analyses on those scans. That's a really interesting. That's a really interesting point. And when we talk about PSMA addition, they're giving 6 cycles of lutetium PSMA 617 in that study, and you sort of wonder, well, how much signal might there be at the end of 5 or 6 cycles? With ADT plus an ARPI, and then 4 doses of lutetium PSMA 617. Like, how much signal is going to be left in terms of PSMA? So that's a really fascinating point. So. Yeah, we certainly had one of the reasons, again, we took a bit longer to recruit than we wanted was because we had to register more patients than we expected because our projected screen fail rate was way off. That was one we were Nostradamus, squared, Michael and I, on the undetectable PSA rate. We were dumbass on the PSA on the screen fail based on PET because we just had no idea. But that's a really fascinating part of the work, and I think that's something we should. And I know we're planning to look at that because that's a really fascinating part of it, and just to see. It's actually almost a little frightening when you see some of these guys who qualify for the trial, but you see just how heterogeneous their disease is. Like you can see up front, but before they've had any ADT, they've got these, you can see even just on their imaging, they've got polyclonal disease because it's you can see it on the imaging phenotype. It's fascinating and almost a little scary at the same time.
So there's a lot to learn from this trial. I mean, the Lancet Oncology data is out today, but there's going to be several more papers coming. We've got imaging biomarkers, not just at baseline, but everyone had an on-treatment PSMA and FDG PET, not just PSMA, but also a second FDG PET, and it's timed at the 3-month time point. So half the population had docetaxel up to that point, half the population had lutetium. So we've got a direct lutetium to docetaxel restaging comparison, and we've taken bloods for ctDNA and other analysis at both these time points.
And disease progression for ctDNA.
And they're really all castration sensitive still at that point. So it'll be really interesting. That question that always comes up is what does the PSMA PET look like after a few months of ADT, etc. So
and we've got after 2 doses of lutetium PSMA as well. So in the experimental group, because that's pre-docetaxel in that group. So that's a really fascinating part of it. I mean, I think we've always thought that's going to be a really important secondary analysis or subsequent paper. So, really exciting as well.
Amazing.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because, I mean, we in Australia, I think, are very good at using these imaging biomarkers to select patients. But around the world, that's not the case. And there's a school of thought that even in patients with mCRPC, even if they don't have PSMA expressing disease, a proportion of them will still respond to lutetium PSMA. What do you think in this sort of mHSPC setting? Can you just give it to everyone?
God, I love that question.
I think there's no magic here. I tell people lutetium PSMA is a radiation delivery device, effectively. We give an injection, it finds its way to tumours. It's a way of delivering high doses of radiation. If we don't get high doses of radiation to the tumours, it's just not an effective therapy. We can image that. We can see that the imaging biomarkers are pretty profound. So I think actually some people, I would like to argue, as you bring this treatment earlier, even more so than end stage, there's going to be a greater need for patient selection. And fortunately, we have a great biomarker, which is a PSMA PET, and I would argue an FDG PET too, to really select. And in an ideal management tree, I think you're going to be able to select who needs chemo, who needs an ARPI, who needs lutetium PSMA. So if you do your PSMA PET and you've got screamingly high SUVs, and SUV mean is even better, you want to probably have lutein. But if you're low, maybe you just want to have an ARPI and docetaxel. So we need to work all these things out, but I think we need a more personalised approach than a one-size-fits-all. It's not a matter of who's going to get lutetium and who's going to get docetaxel or an ARPI, because you're probably going to see all three of them. It's a matter of optimal sequencing and combinations.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then you throw in a PARP and immunotherapy, and we do have the biomarkers for all these, and that's going to be the future.
And I think the other thing there, Renu, is that more patients, were not eligible based on low PSMA expression rather than FDG PET discordance, because we did loosen, as Michael pointed out, the criteria compared to, say, therapy, because of just the fact this de novo high volume patients, unfortunately, with that rare aggressive disease phenotype, they just have more heterogeneity. And if we kept a really tight FDG PET criteria, we've had a higher screen failure. We just couldn't have recruited. So, plus the fact that we were giving docetaxel, which will hopefully treat those FDG positive clones, or at least some of them. So, yeah, I agree with Michael. I think that patient selection was really important here, particularly in this patient population. And I think with all the treatment options going forward, in this space, given that PARPs are going to likely move in this space and other treatments, I think it's going to be even more important to select optimally, personally, in both mHSPC and MCRPC.
Michael, ever since you published the first prospective trial in 2018, apart from the benefits in disease parameters, one of the other things we saw was symptomatic relief and improvement in quality of life. And I think that's been one of the most attractive features about bringing lutetium earlier in the disease spectrum. It seems to be tolerated better. It's a targeted therapy. When we did lutectomy, when all other neoadjuvant therapies have either failed or had lots of toxicity, lutetium PSMA seemed to be tolerated really well. But we've always said we don't really have the long-term data yet. But now we have almost 10 years of data.
And I think
what do we know?
Even in UpFront PSMA, one, you can look at the physician-reported adverse events, the CTCAEs, and there's no difference between the two arms, none. But we also did patient-reported outcomes. So patients filled out questionnaires. You're going to have to go to the supplementary appendix to look at that data. But what you'll see is that initially when patients go on docetaxel, their quality of life goes down, whereas the lutetium arm didn't. So again, just in that short period of the first few weeks, patients had a better quality of life on lutetium than docetaxel. Then obviously the lutetium patients got docetaxel, so we see that quality of life dip. But this is a great feature of lutetium therapy. I think there's no quality of life detriment, but if you have symptoms such as pain or fatigue, often your symptoms get better. And when, this is the great thing about being a nuclear medicine specialist, is the patients come to me and they've often had docetaxel or cabazitaxel, and then we give them lutetium, and they love telling the nuclear medicine specialist how great this treatment is, how poor their quality of life was with chemotherapy, and how this is just the best treatment they've had in their journey.
Having seen everything. Look, it's amazing. Huge congratulations.
Yeah.
It's a big day today, oral session. Big congratulations to you and all the collaborators, everyone who funded it, and of course the patients.
We should say,
and a shout out to our urologists, because this trial,
the
patients often did come from urologists. These patients with newly diagnosed disease present to urology, and this trial would not work if we didn't have urology, medical oncology, and nuclear medicine actually working well together.
Yeah, these are urology patients, aren't they? Really?
No, that's right.
It's a testament to the collaborative efforts.
That's right, Declan. I actually wanted to, before we close, wanted to say, to thank all of the urology colleagues around the country who referred into all the sites. We not an easy study to recruit to at times, and we had a lot of support, and obviously the patients and their families and caregivers.
A shout out to ANSTO. We didn't mention them earlier. They make lutetium-177, nuclear reactor in Lucas Heights, and they supplied the lutetium right around Australia for this trial. So that's an incredibly important asset we have in Australia that enables some of this investigator-initiated research.
Love it. And so hopefully that got our listeners and viewers excited. And at the end of this, if you're watching on YouTube, we'll put up the list of authors and sponsors and funders if you want to have a look at that. And of course, it's all in the Lancet Oncology today. I'm sure we'll find it easily on socials today. There'll be lots of activity and lots of discussion.
I think it's time for champagne.
Yeah, exactly. So we might have a sneaky glass of champagne here in the GUCast studio when we sign up.
I think we should.
But as you listen to this, if you're in Barcelona, I'm sure, Arun, you'll be in some bar somewhere.
Yeah, for sure. Come find him.
So it is a great day to celebrate another advance in prostate cancer. This isn't quite a practice-changing trial yet, but it certainly gives us an indication that adding in lutetium to a very high standard of care in this metastatic hormone-sensitive population has a lot of activity, and it's really important data, and we can look forward to more data coming like PSMA addition. So yeah,
Absolutely.
great. That's all we have time for on this episode of GUCast. A special thanks again to our partners at Novartis who have joined us as silver partners on the podcast, and they'll be supporting all the other exciting work we have coming in PSMA theranostics around the world over the next year or two. And thank you again all for listening.